It's the Dark Reading News Desk. I'm Terry Sweeney, contributing editor with Dark Reading. I'm joined now by Jason Fruge, VP of Business Applications Cybersecurity for Onapsis. Jason, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
Appreciate you being here. Let's start by talking about what we used to call perimeter security and how that used to define so many strategies. With the advent of mobile, the cloud, just so many advanced applications, we're now seeming to work from this model of the perimeter is really where the data resides, right?
Absolutely.
So as a former CISO, I mean, you're well familiar with these issues. How does this impact customers' own planning and management of their data, their applications, and their end users?
That's a great question, Terry. And I think that what happens is each application really has to account for security on its own a little bit. It used to be,
Sure.
As you said, where you could just simply rely on the fact that you had a perimeter-based firewall, and that was sufficient. And then we started to add layers into the network. But now we're seeing that with advanced application hacking and things like that, and proprietariness of applications, there has to be application security built into the application itself. And really, to your point, putting the perimeter where the data is the best way to achieve that. And then also having some supplementary controls within that perimeter itself to even dive further into it. So incorporating that into the business is really saying we need to get more tightly aligned with the business applications from a security point of view, and really understand what it is we're trying to protect from a data perspective, and what the capabilities of the existing security controls in the network are, and what we need to supplement them with.
Okay, so with a big shift in what we used to consider the perimeter, what new roles or capabilities do you imagine that the modern IT infrastructure will need to keep all this secure?
Well, I think now we've kind of moved from we're moving into a time where IT is really more of a service than an asset, right? IT used to be just a series of technology assets that you would own. Today, we're partnering with service providers to join forces and deliver those same services. We're hosting our infrastructure in other companies' environments. We're relying on cloud-based technologies, some hybrid technologies where we're really teamed up. And so the classical IT approach to having a break-fix organization that really just maintains applications, really those resources can be repurposed because new requirements are necessary now from a governance point of view to make sure that if those applications and infrastructures are hosted on someone else's environment, they're doing what they promised they would do from a security point of view, and from a break-fix point of view, configuration management point of view. All these things need to be looked at, and not just looked at from the contract point of view, but continuously monitored for security and availability purposes.
So it may not just be policy, it may actually be the law that is being followed there.
Exactly.
Depending on the vertical market. The movement to cloud would also seem to offer the prospect, at least, of offloading security to a third party. But as we're seeing, that's really not how it's working itself out. What do you advise customers in these instances?
Well, I think there is an illusion with a lot of organizations that if they move something to a cloud, they're shifting responsibility for the security there. And there's really a shared responsibility between the service provider who's providing that cloud service and the person who owns the data, who's really then responsible for making sure the data is secure. It won't be a sufficient response to a consumer whose data was stolen if you were to just simply say, well, I put it in Amazon's environment. It was really up to them.
Right.
They expect you to control that information, as does the insurance company and everyone else involved. So it's very important that you take advantage of the capabilities those cloud providers offer, like encrypting the data, not encrypting it. Where does it make sense to tokenize, et cetera? Also adding some of your own technologies that you can purchase to put in that cloud environment to monitor your system. So there will be a certain point in that stack of security capabilities that the cloud provider will be responsible for, but then the rest of the way up through the application is generally going to be you. So as you move applications into the cloud, it's important to educate the teams to say, just moving it over there doesn't make us more secure. It actually kind of makes us less secure.
Right.
And we need to supplement with some additional controls and capabilities so that we have proper governance.
Are the big three cloud providers, is that demarc line, at least where security is concerned, is it more or less the same for each of them? Do they draw it differently? How do you see that?
It's pretty consistent depending on the type of cloud service. If it's infrastructure as a service, there's a pretty consistent demarcation between where customers are responsible and so on. Even with a SaaS, there's a pretty consistent demarcation where data security is your responsibility and so on. So yeah, I would say that's pretty fair. But the way they approach it from even their area of responsibility can be a little different. So for example, you might see Amazon, Google, their default security configuration that they provide you on a container or workload is pretty secure. But generally speaking, when your company goes to implement technology in that space, we begin by opening everything up, building the application, and then trying to put it back to that secure state, and that doesn't always happen. So again, it's the need to, go back and verify that you are being consistent with the security expectations that were there by default in the first place. So
sure, do your homework and really be clear about what the contract says and what the cloud provider is actually going to do and not do.
And not do,
yeah.
Exactly.
As organizations work to modernize the security of their business critical applications, what are some of the common mistakes that you see as you work with customers?
I think the biggest mistake is being so focused on cost containment that they're not open to adding those additional compensating controls. I mean, the rule in security really is if you lose control here, you should add it somewhere else. Like if you lose it in one place, you should add it somewhere else to compensate. And as you move your infrastructure onto someone else's environment, you really lose a measure of control. And if the company's so focused on cost savings by doing that they forget that maybe part of this cost savings needs to be reinvested in compensating controls to make sure we are staying safe, probably the number one mistake. The other is just not recognizing that shared security model we just spoke about.
Okay.
Not even having that conversation. I think that's probably the second biggest mistake that people make.
We hear this frequently. This idea of shared control. IT staffs generally, the SOC generally is not accustomed to this idea of shared control, where security policies and all the things related to security are concerned. And it's kind of shocking that we're this far into cloud evolution where this is really starting to rear its head.
I agree, and it can be kind of a challenge as well for a SOC to paint a consistent picture. And again, this comes back to technology enablement. If you've got parts of your infrastructure in 3 different clouds and some on premises, and you've got like an attacker kind of moving around that environment, you're seeing it in pockets. And so putting that all together to tell that story can be a challenge that SOCs have to rise to as well.
Sure. Jason, how closely has your view of the threat landscape changed as you've taken a closer look, as you've gone from the CISO side to the vendor side? Are you more or less aligned with that, or where are you with that transition?
Well, I think from the CISO point of view, the cloud creates a new threat surface, right? You have these containers, you have shared infrastructure considerations. Now you've got other people's data sharing bits of infrastructure. People can potentially move around inside of a cloud provider and attack data. So the need to encrypt, for example, might be heightened because you have greater attack vectors and surface in that environment. So yeah, I would say that the attack surface actually does increase. And from the CISO point of view, from a vendor point of view, I would say that it creates opportunities. But those opportunities really require that education and helping people understand that, again, going back to those containers that now create attack surface, going back to that shared infrastructure also creates attack surface, and just a general lack of insight into what's happening inside that cloud creates uncertainty. And so the need for heightened governance and controls to help you keep eyes on those things and create roles so that people stay focused on those things are necessary, absolutely.
So another topic I wanted to ask you about was this idea of security shifting left into the application development cycle. This is officially becoming a thing, as we're hearing here at RSA and elsewhere. Are you seeing more evidence of this in your role with Onapsis?
Absolutely. This is something that comes up quite a bit. I think the old days of application security, where we would go to the developers who are using something like a waterfall model, and we would say, when you're about to go live, we need to perform a formal test of your code, and then in a couple weeks, we'll bring you back a list of vulnerabilities, and you'll have a couple weeks to fix them based on how complex they are, and then we'll redo the test. Those days are over. today people want to put code into production on a daily basis all the time, sometimes multiple times a day. And so they need new tools that enable them to have real-time security checks in place. And this is so important that security leaders recognize that those days of the waterfall are gone.
Sure.
We've got to think differently about this.
Yeah.
And thank goodness, because that process really did inhibit the business. And so, so now we have opportunities to start scoring developers from how efficiently they write secure code, increasing secure code training, but also increasing capabilities to check that code in real time as it's being written, and then create processes to report on vulnerabilities that were put into production without being repaired, right? And implement, in some cases, maker-checker processes. So if somebody wants to put a vulnerable code into production because they're being pressured on a timeline, someone else has to sign off on it before that can be advanced,
Wow.
right? So those sorts of capabilities are becoming more and more important. More and more people are demanding that sort of thing. Absolutely.
Jason, some great insights about cloud security and what customers are up against.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on News Desk today.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
We've been talking with Jason Fruge of Onapsis. This has been Terry Sweeney for Dark Reading News Desk. Thank you for joining us.